Notes 5-5, number 1, we're going to be writing equations from tables and graphs. And if you remember, we've already talked about writing equations from graphs. So we're going to review graphs and we're going to talk about tables. So the first thing we're going to talk about is slope-intercept form. We need two pieces of information in order to write the equation of a linear function. We need slope, which is m, and we need the y-intercept, which is b. And remember, the y-intercept is where a graph crosses the y-axis. Okay? So we're going to talk about graphs, we're going to talk about tables, but tables first. From a table, we can find the slope by calculating y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So that is our slope formula where we pick 2 points, we plug them in, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. That gives us our slope. Look for the y-intercept as the value of y where the x value is equal to 0. So what that means is in our table, we're going to find where x is 0. The y value that goes with it is our y-intercept. From graphs, to write an equation from a graph, we look from a graph, we find the slope by setting up a ratio of rise over run. And remember, rise is how much we go up or down, and run is how much we go left or right. We look for the y-intercept as the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. Okay? So we're going to start with the table because we haven't done that before. We'll get into a graph, and then I'll let you do 2 examples. So practice writing equations from tables and graphs in the following real-world situations. Number 1, Luke's family goes to the movies and purchases a large popcorn. They are debating whether or not to purchase any drinks. The table below shows how much they'll spend on the number of drinks they decide to purchase. So we have number of drinks, we have total cost. Now remember, y is the dependent variable, x is the independent variable. So y depends on x. So in this situation, the total cost depends on the number of drinks. So total cost is y, number of drinks is x. So we need to find slope, and we do that by y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We need to find the y-intercept. This is where x equals 0. And then we're going to write an equation, and then we figure out what the slope and the y-intercept represent. So let's find slope first. With a table, to find slope, we have to pick 2 points. I'm going to go ahead and pick this point and this point. Now, another strategy you could have is you could look at the decimals and pick the same ones. That's up to you. But I'm just going to go ahead and pick 0 and 1. So I'm going to say that this is point number 2. This is point number 1. So that means y2, y1, x2, x1. So what we're going to do now is we're going to plug into our formula. So y2 is 10 minus 6.25 over 1 minus 0. Okay. 10 minus 6.25. Well, 10 minus 6 is 4. Subtract 0.25 from that. 3.75. 1 minus 0 is 1. And anything over 1 is just whatever's on the top. So 3.75. That is our slope. Oops, I forgot a blank up here. Once we have these 2 values, we will write equations in the form y equals mx plus b. Okay, I forgot a blank up there where it says slope-intercept form. I was just thinking about that. I apologize. Okay, back to our example. What is the y-intercept? So when we're looking at a table, the y-intercept is the y value where x is 0. So we need to find where x is 0, and we want to use the y value that goes with it. So in this case, x is 0, the y-intercept, so B, this is M, slope is M, B is y-intercept 6.25. Okay? Now, when we write an equation, our equation is in y equals mx plus b. This is called slope-intercept form. So m is slope, b is the intercept, slope-intercept form. So remember, slope is m, y-intercept is b. So all we do, y equals, our m is 3.75, x, and then our y-intercept is positive 6.25. And that is our equation. We plug in m, our slope, we plug in b, our y-intercept. And our y-intercept was positive, so we say plus b. What does the slope represent in this situation? The slope in this situation is the total cost, sorry, something in my throat. The total cost with drinks. Okay? Okay. What does the y-intercept represent? The y-intercept is the initial cost without any drinks. Because our y-intercept is where we start, 0, 6.25. So if they don't buy any drinks, it's $6.25. So our y-intercept is that initial cost before any drinks are added. Okay? All right, let's look at number 2. So number 2, we've kind of already done. We're looking at a graph, we're writing an equation. So Betty's Bakery uses a chocolate chip cookie recipe that calls for a certain ratio of brown sugar to butter as shown by the graph. So brown sugar, butter. Our y is our dependent, our x is our independent. So we need to find the slope, we need to find the y-intercept, and then we write an equation. So our slope, we are given 2 points here. So I'm going to do rise over run. So I'm going to draw my triangle connecting the 2 points like this. Okay. I'm going to count my rise, but I need to check my scale first. I go from 3 to 6. So that gives me 3. My run is from 4 to 8. That is 4. So my rise is 3. My run is 4. That is our slope, and that is m. Okay, the y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So our y-axis is here. Our graph crosses right there at 0. So this is a proportional graph because it crosses through the origin. And when we write an equation for a proportional graph, y equals mx, because our b is 0, so it is not there. So y equals, my slope is m3 over 4, x. And because my b is 0, it is proportional, and we don't have to put the 0 on the end. Okay? All right, what does the slope represent in our situation? Our slope is brown sugar to butter ratio. So if I have 3 cups of brown sugar, I need 4 cups of butter. All right? And what is the y-intercept in this situation? It is starting brown sugar to butter ratio. The starting brown sugar to butter ratio. Before I start my recipe, I start with 0 of any of it. Okay? So for a graph, we find our slope, rise over run. We find the y-intercept, where it crosses the y-axis, and then we put it into an equation. Okay? Remember, if your b is 0, your equation is y equals mx. If B is a number, it's y equals mx plus b. Okay? All right, let's see if you can do a couple. Number 3. A plane uses a certain amount of fuel based on the number of miles it travels shown in the table. Here's what I would like you to do. I want you to find slope. I want you to find the y-intercept, and I want you to write an equation. Okay? Use the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Pick 2 points, find the slope. The y-intercept is where x equals 0. Okay? And then you'll plug that in to the equation. So, the gallons of fuel depend on the miles traveled. So, x for miles, y for gallons. See what you can do. Go. Okay, so if we find our slope, we pick 2 points. Gallons of fuel is y, so that goes on the top. Miles goes on the bottom. We get 156 over 30. You can, because those are such large numbers, if you take a calculator, you can divide the top by the bottom. You get 5.2, which is our m. For y-intercept, we find where x is 0, which is right here. We look at the y value that goes with it, which is 0. And remember, if the y value is 0, our equation is proportional, y equals mx. So our final equation is y equals 5.2. Now, what does the slope represent? The slope represents the gallons used per mile. So every 1 mile, the plane uses 5.2 gallons of fuel. What does the y-intercept represent in the situation? The initial, so the starting initial amount of fuel used. Because they went 0 miles, there's 0 gallons of fuel used. Okay? All right, number 4, give this one a shot. Robert pays for his family to go bowling. He first rents shoes for everyone, and then he pays a certain amount per game that his family plays, as shown in the graph. Find the slope, find the y-intercept, and write an equation. And remember, in a graph, pick 2 points. You can pick any 2 you want. Make sure you check your scale. Go. Okay, so the slope is 9 over 2 if we check our scale. Now, because we're dealing with money, we're going to divide that. We get $4.50, so 4.50 is m. The y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis, which is 12, and it's positive. So our equation is y equals mx plus b. M is slope, b is y-intercept. So our equation, y equals 4.5x plus 12. Now, what does the slope represent? The slope represents the price per game. Okay? Because Robert pays for shoes first and then per game. What does the y-intercept represent? The cost of shoes. Because that was his initial payment. He first rents shoes for everyone before he plays any of the games. Go back and rewatch or rewind anything you need to.